meeting. I want to welcome the Taoiseach and your officials. And we'll get straight into the estimate. If you'd like to give your opening statement, please, Taoiseach.
Thanks very much, Chairman, and thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before the Select Committee to consider the 2019 estimates for votes 1 to 6. You've been supplied with a detailed briefing document on the various votes in advance. I'll outline the work of my department and its proposed 2019 estimate, as well as the proposed 2019 estimate for the President's establishment, the Office of the Attorney General, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Office of the Chief State Solicitor. While I have certain responsibilities to the Oireachtas for administrative matters in these offices, they operate independently from the department. And my colleague Sean Kine, TD, Minister of State and Government Chief Whip, will outline the 2019 estimate allocations for the CSO and will take any questions relevant to that vote following the committee's consideration of other votes in my vote group. I'm joined today with the following officials from my department: Martin Fraser, Secretary General, Dennis Breen, Head of Corporate Affairs, and Geraldine Butler, Finance Officer. Vote 1 is the President's establishment, and the estimate for the President's establishment for 2019 is 4.43 million. That includes 3 million for pay and administration, with the balance funding the centenarian's bounty. Vote 2 is the Department of the Taoiseach, for which the revised estimate for the department is 35.26 million, which includes 22.52 million for staff and administration costs. The primary role of my department is to support me in executive functions as Taoiseach, to support the government and to oversee the implementation of the programme for government. It also supports 4 Ministers of State who are assigned to the department. These are the Government Chief Whip, the Minister of State with responsibility for defence, the Minister of State for European Affairs, the Minister of State for Data Protection, who is also assigned to a number of other departments. In addition to assisting my work as Taoiseach and that of the government, the department's strategic priorities are as follows. First, building a sustainable economy. Second, building a better and fairer society. Third, building strong relationships in Europe and the rest of the world. Fourth, Brexit. And fifth, future planning. The department is also responsible for a range of other issues, such as state protocol, including, for example, the papal visit last August, national commemorations and the organisation of the presidential inauguration ceremony and state reception last November. The department also engages in the formulation and implementation of government policy and advises me on the full range of domestic policy issues and also on international affairs. An important part of my department's work is providing a secretariat for meetings of the committee and cabinet committees. The department also funds a number of inquiries, including the Moriarty Tribunal, the Cregan Commission and the Cook Commission. Other areas of responsibility include constitutional issues, relations with the Office of President, relations with the Oireachtas, the Government Information Service, the National Economic and Social Council, the Policing Reform Implementations Office, the Citizens' Assembly and the Dublin North East Inner City Initiative. Last year, the government published Project Ireland 2040, which is the first time ever that a government has linked a national spatial plan with a national development and infrastructure investment plan. It gives us as a country a framework for our future development, a framework that will enable our country to grow over the next 20 years in a manner that provides for better and sustainable regional balance, less commuting, and greater vibrancy in our villages, towns, cities and rural areas. Ireland continues to experience sustainable and balanced economic growth. Employment continues to rise and now stands at just under 2.3 million, a record high. Unemployment was down to 5.7% in January, the lowest since August 2008. Government is now focusing on achieving full employment, a job for everyone who wants one, and ensuring that jobs that are created are quality jobs. By this I mean jobs that raise living standards, reward employees and provide for protections and pensions. Quality jobs must go beyond salary and include good working conditions and benefits, including pension coverage on retirement. Last year, alongside Minister Doherty and Minister Donoghue, I published a 5-year roadmap for pension reform, including the introduction of an auto-enrolment pension scheme for private sector workers, with the first enrolments taking place in 2022. A wide-ranging public consultation is being completed, and Government will shortly make decisions on the next steps. The enactment of the Technological Universities Act means that our focus is now on working with the various consortia to get these new technological universities established and up and running. Project Ireland commits government financial resources to the development of the technological universities, with a particular interest being attached to the establishment of a technological university in the South East, where there currently is no third level and no university. Under Project Ireland 2040, 21.8 billion is committed to the objective of transitioning to a low carbon and climate resilient society. This is the highest amount allocated to any of the 10 national strategic objectives in the plan. And we've strengthened existing measures, such as retrofitting homes and public buildings to improve energy efficiency. We've also made some major decisions, such as banning the registration of any new non-zero emission cars from 2030 onwards, taking coal off the national grid by 2025, and replacing its use at money point with a cleaner alternative. It's important to governments that the gains from a growing economy and prosperity are shared fairly with all Irish citizens and felt in all parts of the country. We want to create a society in which there is true equality of opportunity and one in which nobody feels left behind. The Department supports the work of shaping and reforming public services, especially those requiring a cross-government response through the Cabinet Committee structures. Over the recent period, Government has introduced reforms which seek to improve lives and living standards, to ensure the youngest in society are provided for with the best possible start in life and afforded every opportunity to grow into engaged and active citizens. For this reason, Government launched First Five, a whole-of-government strategy for babies, young children and their families. This has very much been led by Ministers of Home, but it is a cross-government strategy. The aim is to assist families and babies at this critical junction in their lives and create a well-functioning early childhood system and a broadening of the range of options for parents to balance work life and caring. As part of this, Government announced an additional 2 weeks of paid parental leave in the first year of a child's life, and this will kick in from November this year. The Government has also made significant progress in delivering the Affordable Childcare Scheme. The scheme's primary legislation, the Childcare Support Act, has been enacted, with work on regulations, policy, guidelines and IT systems ongoing. During 2018, a set of actions to advance gender equality were advanced, including efforts to reduce the gender pay gap, promote wage transparency and increase women's participation on state and corporate boards. The Government approved a general scheme of the Gender Pay Gap Wage Transparency Bill, and the bill will promote wage transparency by requiring companies to complete a wage survey periodically and report the results showing the gender pay gaps in their establishment. Work on the North East Inner City Initiative continues, with the Programme Implementation Board being assisted by my department. It meets on a monthly basis to oversee progress and the implementation of the 54 actions set out in the Mulvey Report. The Board recently published its 2018 Annual Progress Report, and that highlights some notable achievements, including new Gardaí being assigned to the area, refurbishment works at the Lourdes Daycare Centre, the PTEC initiative in 3 second-level schools, linking industry and education through mentorships and internships. The Board aims for 2019 include initiatives to improve supports for families affected by addiction and drug-related intimidation, to build on relationships with local business and employers to create sustainable employment, and improvements to the physical environment to make the place a better area in which to work and live. A new initiative, Better Balance for Better Business, was announced in 2018 to increase women's representation in governance and senior management positions in the private sector. In June 2018, the Government published the world's first LGBTI+ youth strategy, which aims to create a safe, supportive and inclusive environment for young LGBTI+ people. A youth advisory group was created to ensure that young people were at the heart of the strategic planning process, with input from almost 4,000 young people. Housing and homelessness continue to be among the greatest challenges we're facing as a government and society, and increasing the supply of housing of all forms is our focus. In 2018, 21,450 new homes became available to live in, of which 18,072 were new apartments or houses. This is encouraging when we consider that in 2012, housing output was less than 9,000, and most of that were one-off houses in rural areas. So progress is being made, but it's evident that a lot more needs to be done. and we need to increase this to 25,000 new units this year, which is our target. In August 2018, Government published our Sláinte Care Implementation Strategy, which sets out a vision for the future of healthcare over a 10-year period. My department also supports me in an extensive programme of international engagements to advance Ireland's strategic interests, both within and beyond the European Union. In 2018, we published Global Ireland 2025, an initiative to double the scope and impact of Ireland's global footprint by that year. This is the most ambitious renewal and expansion of Ireland's international presence ever undertaken in terms of diplomacy, culture, business, official development assistance or international development, tourism and trade. And we've made considerable progress in implementing the Global Ireland strategy. In 2018, for example, Ireland opened a new embassy in Wellington, New Zealand, and a new consulate in Vancouver. Throughout 2019, we'll open 6 new embassies and 4 new consulates. We'll also strengthen existing missions and expand our international state agency presence as well. This increased engagement and presence internationally will enable our departments and agencies to take on more ambitious targets in the coming years. Also in 2018, the Government launched Ireland's campaign for election to a seat on the UN Security Council for the 21-22 term. Our candidature reflects Ireland's continuing engagement on issues of international importance and the centrality of the United Nations to our foreign policy. Earlier today, alongside the Taoiseach Minister Cannon, I was pleased to launch the Government's new policy for international development, entitled A Better World. This policy sets out the context in which we will increase our official development assistance over the coming years and the priorities we'll focus on. The policy restates the Government's long-standing commitment to increasing ODA to 0.7% of national income by 2030. It highlights that Ireland's international development policy will focus on gender equality, reducing humanitarian need, climate action and strengthen governance, and the pledge of the Sustainable Development Goals, to leave no one behind and to reach the furthest behind first. At EU level, Ireland is also actively engaged in the debate on the future of Europe, where we've highlighted the need for an ambitious and forward-looking agenda. EU leaders will discuss this further at our informal summit meeting in Sibiu in Romania, which takes place on the 9th of May, ahead of agreeing a new strategic agenda for the period ahead of the June European Council. The European Union is the common home we've helped to build, and as a small country, our experience regarding Brexit has only served to reinforce our commitment to EU membership. Ahead of Sibiu, it's intended that the Government will publish a statement on Ireland's perspectives on the future of Europe, which will be informed by last year's Citizens' Dialogue led by Minister McEntee, as well as the Oireachtas engagement, which will be taking place in the coming weeks. The withdrawal agreement, agreed last November, reflects the Irish Government's priorities in the negotiations on Brexit: to protect the peace and the Good Friday Agreement, and to ensure the continuation of the common travel area. It sets out arrangements required to avoid a hard border on this island, in light of the Government's own red lines and our need to protect the integrity of the single market and the customs union, our single market and customs union. Since the referendum vote in June 2016, we've been very conscious of the need to ensure that the rights and citizenship protections currently available to all of the people in Northern Ireland under the Good Friday Agreement are not undermined by the UK's withdrawal. The deal which is on the table contains a commitment from the UK that Brexit will not result in any diminution of the rights, safeguards and equality of opportunity as set out in the Good Friday Agreement. This is a firm undertaking made in a legally binding international agreement. One of the most striking things about what's unfolded since the UK's decision to leave has been the remarkable solidarity and unity on the EU side. It has been strong and resolute. Ireland's concerns on the border have become EU concerns, and our insistence on a legally binding and operable means to avoid a hard border has become an EU negotiating principle. In my recent contacts with the Presidents of the EU institutions last week, Presidents Tusk and Juncker, and President Tahani some weeks ago, I was again assured in the strongest terms that the European Union stands by the withdrawal agreement, including the Irish protocol and the backstop therein. Unfortunately, the political situation in the UK and the rejection of the agreement by Westminster means the terms on which the UK will depart are still unclear. 29th of March is the date on which the UK is due to leave the EU, as we know. Augmenting the ongoing work of my department's International, EU and Northern Ireland Division on Brexit is the Brexit Preparedness and Contingency Planning Unit, which assists the Secretary-General's group overseeing ongoing work on national Brexit preparedness and contingency planning. The unit works closely with other divisions of my department, including the Economic Division, and with colleagues in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, which has overall responsibility for Brexit. The work led by the Taoiseach and the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade has overseen the detailed preparations for negotiations at EU level, engagement with the administrations in Belfast and London, and coordination of planning around economic impacts of Brexit. Across government, relevant departments and agencies and overseas missions have also been strengthened to deal with Brexit. Preparations and planning for a range of scenarios, including contingency planning, was initiated well in advance of the UK referendum. Over the last 18 months, the Taoiseach has led efforts to deepen and intensify this planning. The whole of government response to Brexit is underpinned by a comprehensive set of government structures, which ensure that all departments and their agencies are engaging in detailed preparedness and planning, including through the development of sectoral action plans. While government and the EU are committed to securing a negotiated outcome, that has not yet been achieved, and we're now 29 days away from the UK's withdrawal from the Union. Government therefore considers that preparations for a no-deal outcome must be intensified, as the risk of no-deal Brexit increases day by day, posing unique and unprecedented challenges. The unprecedented risks associated with the departure of the UK from the EU featured strongly in the 2018 National Risk Assessment, an overview of strategic risks published by my department back in August. Among the geopolitical, social, economic and environmental risks identified were new risks associated with the impact of social media on public debate and elections, and indeed the risk of an overheating of our economy. Brexit brings uncertainty and risks which require steady and strategic management in both our policies and our relationships. We must continue to manage our public finances and protect the economy and seek new opportunities to diversify and grow. Technological developments are transforming lives and driving change in every corner of the world. And it's essential that Ireland should be at the forefront of these developments and engage with emerging issues. That's why my department organised the Data Summit in September 2018 to demonstrate Ireland's leadership in digital and data. The summit brought together stakeholders from across the world to discuss emerging issues such as the ongoing implementation of the GDPR and the implications of artificial intelligence for our society. Preparations for a similar event in 2019 are now underway. An advisory group chaired by the Secretary-General of my department is developing a vision and a roadmap for the Grand Canal Innovation District. The advisory group will submit a report to Government in the second quarter of 2019. It will have a particular focus on strengthening links between existing multinational companies in the area, SMEs and startups, and academic and research institutions to build a better innovation ecosystem. The Department, in conjunction with others, is also leading the development of a new overarching national digital strategy that will set out Ireland's vision and ambition to help Ireland maximise the economic and societal benefits from ongoing digitalisation and the transformative effects of it. Finally, my department also assists the National Economic and Social Council, or NESC, in providing forward-looking strategic advice on economic, social and sustainable development issues. Its current working programme includes housing and land, transport-led development and housing policy, social insurance and the welfare system, and towards a sustainable developmental welfare state and climate change and low-carbon transition. The SecGen and Assistant Secretary for the Department serve as Chair and Deputy Chair respectively. Vote 3 is the vote of the Office of the Attorney-General, and the 2019 revised estimate for his office is 15.59 million. The majority of administrative expenditure relates to staff salaries, which cost just under 12 million. The next largest expenditure item is the grant of almost 2.3 million to the Law Reform Commission. Vote 4 relates to the CSO. As I mentioned previously, the Chief Whip will present the revised estimates for the CSO to the committee. Vote 5 is the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. The 2019 revised estimate for the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is 42.8 million. The estimate for 2019 represents a decrease of 2% over the 2018 estimate. And the principal reason for this is a decrease due to a reduction of 1.54 million in input A3 fees to council. This is partially offset by an increase of 0.54 million in the provision made in A5 for the local State Solicitor Service. Vote 6, the Chief State Solicitor Office. The 2019 revised estimate for the Chief State Solicitor's Office is just over 34.6 million. Salaries, wages and allowances account for just over 18 million of that, out of a total admin budget of 20.5 million. The remaining 2.4 million is attributable to the general running costs of the Office of the Chief State. A provision of 15.8 million is allocated for the payment of legal fees incurred, 13.5 million for council fees, 1.3 for general law expenses, which includes, for example, expert witnesses and stenographers, the balance being used for the use of external solicitors. Thank you.
Deputy Burton.
Thank you, and thank you, Taoiseach, for your presentation. There's just a couple of things I wanted to ask you about. First of all, if you could tell us what the further anticipated expenditure is likely to be on the remaining tribunals which come within the remit of your department, and if you have a guesstimate of the likely period. The second is on page 20. There's an sorry. Oh, okay. Sorry.
With permission of the members, we can continue, if you wish. And others are.
Is it? There was an agreement not to have one. I thought that's what I was told.
No, it's not
Parliamentary elections.
It's the European elections.
We're just sitting our hands down here.
Doesn't affect me. I'd say it might affect the chair.
No.
He has our full support.
You can sit on your hands here rather than your hands in there. Deputy Burton. You don't seem to have any issue with it. Deputy Burton.
They might have abolished the European Parliament, of course, by the time we went up, so we'll see. Yeah, just in terms of the identification of the staff working in your department, I notice you have just under 20 politically appointed staff, 19.6 politically appointed staff. And then, in addition, in terms of divisions and business units, you have one of the units is the GIS with 16 people, and there's a corporate affairs unit as well with 32 people. I was just wondering, in terms of the discussions we've had over the last year and a half about the government's messaging, your I suppose, innovation in coming to Dublin, in coming to government, was to have a common government messaging and a common banner on all government messaging under YouGov. I think you told us recently in the Dáil that you're transferring that now, I understand, to DPER. But you still have a very significant staff there dealing with essentially public relations and messaging and so on. And I just wonder if you would tell us what those people are now doing if DPER has now taken control of the SPIN unit and the YouGov. I also want to ask as well, Taoiseach, because I know you referred there at length in your speech to housing, and obviously you're very concerned about it. What I don't understand is, and this applies not just to our constituency, our shared constituency, but to every constituency in the country. In the figures out today, we again have really serious numbers of children who are long-term now in homelessness. And we know, like very long terms of unemployment in relation to young people, particularly young men, that it's very damaging. We also know that when young children are in homelessness over a protracted period of time, and that's generally taken, Taoiseach, to be more than 6 months, where they don't have a place to call their own, that in fact the damage that's done to them can be very severe. I mean, what do you do in terms of your Office of Taoiseach to have yourself briefed in relation to the crisis, particularly affecting children in homelessness with one or more parents. And secondly, you have said to us on many occasions in the Dáil that you don't personally like the style of cabinet subcommittees where detailed papers are brought from perhaps across a variety of different departments or institutions, and they're discussed. And I accept that your style is that you prefer to discuss everything at the whole of Cabinet with your Cabinet colleagues around the table. That's a fair choice. But who in government now examines and listens to and audits the many, many detailed reports that are available in relation to the devastating impact of homelessness, in particular on children? I note in your paper there you have essentially what seemed to me like a target of 25,000 houses a year, which I presume as well 18,000 of these were new dwellings, so I assume the others are boarded up houses being brought back into use and so on. I'm not sure, you might clarify that. But I don't think there's a housing expert in this country who has not suggested to you that for the next 5 years, simply because of the backlog and from where the country is coming from, that we would actually need to up that number to about 35,000. And I just want to know, you know, as it were, leader of your own department with overall responsibility, as you said, for social advancement and people's well-being on the headings you read out, how do you actually address that? And who nowadays discusses and examines the detailed briefings that are provided from a variety of sources and that used in fact to be discussed, possibly at excessive length, in Cabinet subcommittees over a range of issues, but where, as you say yourself, you just deal with them directly at Cabinet. And I know my own experience from Cabinet is that the amount of time for detailed discussion in Cabinet is actually relatively small, and no one has suggested that your Cabinet sits for very long. I think the general understanding is the meetings are brisk enough. And, you know, again, that's something I think we'd probably expect. So where is that discussion going on now in relation? I mean, it would also point questions in the direction as well of the happenings on the Children's Hospital, that in fact at Cabinet government level, which is your responsibility, there would not seem to be a space anymore where they're discussed in some detail, because I presume there must have been some warnings that not everything was right in terms of the cost structure and the level of progress happening on the Children's Hospital.
Taoiseach.
Thanks very much, Deputy, for your questions. The first one related to the tribunals, and I imagine you're including commissions of investigation in that question, because Minority is the only tribunal extant under my department. And of course it's never possible to know for sure what the final cost is going to be, because that will depend on third-party legal fees, lots of other things, and when it ends will of course depend on how long it takes for it to do its work. But to give you some rough figures, on Moriarty the spend to date has been 65 million, and our best estimate, and it's only an estimate, is that it will top out at around 75 million, depending on further legal cost awards. On Cregan, which is the Site Serve IBRC Commission, as you know, the spend to date has been 7 million, but we anticipate that it could be as much as 30 million. And it's difficult to say when that will end. I sought an interim report on it, but haven't received it as yet. On Cook, that's the one looking into NAMA and the allegations that have been made around Project Eagle. The spend to date is 2 million, and it's estimated that it'll top out at around 10 million. But again, these are just estimates. On the 20 politically appointed staff, and I know we've discussed this before.
I'm sorry, Taoiseach, can I just ask you on that, if you don't mind? That's well over there. That's well over 100 million for the costs that you anticipate.
Yes. which again I think is something that we should all bear in mind, because there isn't a week that goes by in the chamber that an opposition spokesperson or leader doesn't call for an inquiry or a commission investigation or a tribunal into something, and while they may well be merited, we need to bear in mind the time that they take, the fact that they very often don't give people the answers that they want or need, and do cost the taxpayer a lot of money. And I think we need to all bear that in mind in our demands for further inquiries and commissions and tribunals into the future. I think Joan Burton asked about the 20 politically appointed staff. They, of course, are for the whole department, not just for me, and they include civilian drivers for the Ministers of State and constituency staff, and staff for the Ministers of State, and also staff for the independents. As people will know from the Chamber, the amount spent on political appointed staff by me as Taoiseach is less than my last 3 forebears holding the office, and I intend to keep it at that, notwithstanding increments and pay rises and all the rest of it that cause it to edge up bit by bit every year. I may be wrong, but mygov.ie I think has always been under the Department of Public Expenditure. It never fell under the remit of my department. It's headed up by the OGCIO. The only role that my department had with mygov.ie and gov.ie was that we were the first department to embrace it and transition our website over to it, but we were never running the project that's been run from the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. On GIS, what it does essentially is it's a press function, provides a press office, takes queries from journalists, organises press conferences, organises events and launches, and obviously is responsible for MarionStreet.ie, which is the government news website set up 15, 20 years ago now at this stage. So we've really reverted back to the previous model, with campaigns where they are run, generally being run from outside the department, from the line department, with a degree of coordination from my department. And I still take the view that it's something that would work better were it centralised, but it became such an area of political controversy and distraction that we took the decision to wind it down. But as I think deputies will acknowledge, all of the inquiries since have found that the vast majority of charges and allegations made were without foundation, but that's all history now. In relation to housing and homelessness, we did of course have the figures of the number of people in emergency accommodation published yesterday, which again are bad and very disappointing for all of us struggling to deal with this issue, but most of all, of course, for the people who are affected by it and who are forced to live in emergency accommodation. On the positive side, to the extent that there is a positive side, it does show that the number of families in emergency accommodation is down. It's at its lowest now for a year. And also the number of families in hotels is down as we move more towards the use of family hubs, but nothing to celebrate in any of that. The figures seem to be kind of stabilising at around 10,000. That's where they've been now for the best part of a year, but that's not good enough, and I want the next couple of months to turn the corner and start to see those figures going down rather than stabilising, and that's definitely where we want to be in the next few weeks. In terms of length of stay in emergency accommodation, I don't have the figures in front of me, but I'm advised that the average length of stay for a family in emergency accommodation is around 6 months, and I take the Deputy's point about the long-term psychological impact that stays longer than that can have on children. Although in some cases where it's longer than 6 months, you'll find that offers of accommodation have been made but haven't been accepted, and that's part of the mix as well that we also need to bear in mind. On briefings, I get lots of them on housing, as you can imagine. I've a big one on my desk for a bilateral meeting or a trilateral meeting I'll have next week with the Minister of Finance and the Minister for Housing and their officials and advisors. So we'll discuss these things in different formats, sometimes the full Cabinet, sometimes Cabinet Subcommittee, sometimes a meeting of the 3 or 4 key ministers, which I find to be quite useful. Cabinet Subcommittees have their value, but it's 50, 60 people. Sometimes a meeting of 7 or 8 can be a more productive one. I think those of us who spend a lot of time in meetings will understand why that'll be, but all formats are used depending on which is the most appropriate. I also get briefings from the CEOs of the NGOs, the major NGOs working in the homelessness and housing sector. So I've done a round table meeting on 2 occasions with all of the CEOs from Simon McVerry Trust, Focus, all of those, and had a very good one a few weeks ago, and we'll follow that up again later in the year. Get the briefings directly, of course, from the Department of Housing. NESC, under my own remit, has done some really good work on land use and housing, and I would have been briefed directly by NESC on that. And obviously one of my political advisors as well follows housing and looks at a lot of the report and research that exists. Actually, when it comes to housing and homelessness, that is one of the areas where we make good use of the Cabinet Subcommittee system, precisely because of the fact that it affects a few departments. So the last Cabinet Subcommittee on Infrastructure and Housing, I think, was last week or the week before, and one of the things we particularly examined in that was the interagency report on homelessness, because that requires a response. We all know that homelessness is about a lot more than housing, and dealing with homelessness requires a response from health, requires a response from housing, requires a response from social protection, requires a response from finance and justice, immigration as well. So there was a big focus on that at the last Cabinet Subcommittee, really putting pressure on the other departments to do their bit and to understand that housing isn't just a problem for the Department of Housing. There are immigration issues, so justice needs to be on board. Maybe 20–30% of people who are in emergency accommodation, we don't know the exact figure, are non-EU, may not even have the right to be here or live here. There's also whole issues then around addiction and mental health, and lifting people out of homelessness requires action from the Department of Health, particularly when it comes to issues around much better addiction services and mental health services, and had a detailed discussion around that and what we're going to do with the Simon community in particular around that, responding to some of their requests. And then obviously there's issues around social protection. So the Cabinet Committee system does get used where it's appropriate, but it's often equally appropriate to have discussions with full Cabinet. And in fact, we took that memo from Cabinet Subcommittee to full Cabinet this week. And then in addition to that, we obviously have the issues as well of me meeting ministers one-to-one, or meeting ministers on a trilateral basis, which I find quite useful too. On housing supply, I think you're absolutely right, Deputy. The target is that we should be building about 35,000 new homes in Ireland every year. We want to get away from what we had in the past, which is 80,000 one year and 10,000 the next year. So we want a steady stream of about 35,000 a year. But we're also realistic in knowing that you can only ramp it up at a certain pace. There are rate limiting factors. About 20,000 new homes and apartments were built were built this year. You're correct to say, you asked about the difference, that is indeed ghost estates being finished, voids being brought back into use. But about 18,000, 19,000 brand new homes and apartments were built last year. The target is 25,000 for this year, with the view to getting to 35,000. But we're being practical and honest and realistic about how quickly you can ramp up housing construction in a sustainable way. So even though the numbers built last year were more than any year this decade, we think a reasonable target for this year is to get it up to 25,000, 30 the year after, and 35 the year after that.
Just briefly, you made 3 comments there by way of explanation for some of the difficulties in housing. A bit of the shades of the comments last weekend of the Dublin City Manager, I would think. One of the causes was that people refuse offers. Another cause was that I think you said that 27% of people are international people who've come to Ireland. I think actually the figures in that respect have been much higher in the past. That's actually a relatively low figure for international people. And the third reason you cited was addiction. Now, I actually asked you about children in homelessness, and I recognise that a lot of people who are homeless have problems. But just let me say to you that as far as I'm aware, in terms of the housing figures which were published this morning, as far as I'm aware, the people who sleep rough and who have, by and large, serious mental health and possibly addiction problems, I don't think they're included in today's statistics. I think, just as with women who may be in refuges, they're taken account of, but they're not actually, as far as I'm aware, in today's figures. You know, the real reason is not literally what you're suggesting there. Everything is the fault of people who are homeless. The real reason is that there's a serious breakdown, which is actually becoming worse, in our housing provision structure. I'm glad that you responded to the 35,000. And can I ask you, could there be a government plan to actually start pretty soon, if not now, providing and moving from the 25 to 35 if we're to try and catch up at all?
I'd respectfully ask the Deputy not to put words in my mouth. This is too important an issue to play politics with. The cause of homelessness and the housing crisis is a lack of supply of housing and a lack of affordable housing. But there are plenty of other factors involved in that as well. And those of us who are interested in this area and have spent time visiting facilities, visiting NGOs, will understand that there are other factors that are at play as well. And as you mentioned, when it comes to a lot of people who are rough sleeping, mental health and addiction is a big factor in that. And there are lots of people who are not rough sleeping. Thankfully, they are in shelters and they are in emergency accommodation who do also have problems with addiction and mental health. And that's why just providing housing isn't enough. And what we're trying to do is adopt a holistic approach, particularly under the banner of Housing First, which is providing shelter, providing housing, but then providing all the additional supports that are needed so that somebody can stay off the streets and maintain tenancy and not fall back into homelessness. And those are the things that we need to do and are doing around mental health supports and addiction supports, particularly working with Simon in that area, who are a splendid NGO in the work that they do. First of all, when it comes to people being discharged from hospital so they don't get discharged into homelessness, and then some other things we're going to do with them in the period ahead around addiction in particular. So, really dealing with homelessness requires a holistic approach. It isn't just the Department of Housing or housing that can resolve it. We could build 40,000, 50,000 houses in a couple of years' time and still have homelessness, because it's a social problem as well as one that's related to the number of roofs in the country. You're absolutely correct to say that the rough sleepers aren't included in the figures, nor are people who are in domestic refuges, but are included, of course, are people who don't have an entitlement to housing, and also included are people who have turned down offers of housing. So the figures are never going to be exact, and I don't like to get involved in statistical debates. No matter what the correct figure is, there are too many people in emergency accommodation, and we need to change that.
Thanks, Chairman. Can I thank the Taoiseach for making himself available and for the extensive presentation he's made in relation to the estimates associated with his own department and those under his remit. Notwithstanding all of that, I would concentrate on a few key issues rather than taking up too much time. And I want to focus obviously on your primary role of your department, which is to support you in your executive function as Taoiseach, support the government and to oversee the implementation of the programme for government. And allied to that follows the key strategic priorities within your department to ensure that happens. And notwithstanding again the progress and the efforts that are made in relation to the relationships with Europe and the wider world, and of course Brexit and the unanimity that there is on the part of the Dáil to support the government's stance and its efforts to ensure that the least worst outcome emerges, which of course will be of benefit. And we applaud and support all efforts in that regard and acknowledge them, and would expect your department's whole commitment to that, and any funds that are required in order to ensure that that is the case, we support that also. So I then want to focus on four issues. While conscious of your role in implementing your programme for government, while conscious of your efforts to ensure that's done, and maintaining a sustainable economy, planning for the future, the areas of critical importance in the public domain and in your efforts to ensure that your time in government is successful are in the areas of health, housing, insurance and broadband. They're the four areas I'd just like to hone in on. And in the first instance, without getting into the whole debacle associated with the existing and potential further overrun in the Department of Health or by the board in relation to the provision of the National Children's Hospital. You mentioned in an interview, I believe, this morning that you found the whole episode scandalous And I just wonder what aspect of it specifically did you find was scandalous? And that being the case, what actions are underway, do you believe, that will eradicate anything of that nature happening again, and will arrest the overrun, and will ensure that there's value for money? And we all, of course, as has been said on many occasions, welcome the provision of a children's hospital, want to ensure it is provided as quickly as possible. But that's not to say that we need to investigate forensically the provision of the contract in the first place, how it was arrived at, and was it a porous one that is now punishing us because of the rush to get on site initially. In relation to housing, on page 27 of the revised estimates, there's a section there towards the bottom of the page. It says a new council was appointed in May 17. Its work programme up to September 19 comprises 3 themes. One of those 3 themes was housing and land, which is to be a transport-led development and housing policy. How many times has this met? And I'm conscious too that in October 17, in the budget at that time, you set up the land agency body, the housing and land agency body, the land development agency, I should say. And I welcomed that and hoped that it would be afforded the right legislation, the right authority, the right remit to implement policies that could help and assist in ensuring that it made a difference. And yesterday I heard its chair, John Mornsay, had met for the second time recently. I don't know when he was appointed, but it was last October, 12 months, when we were told that this agency be put in place in the first instance. He also, in response to Sean O'Rourke, said that when he was asked about how it would help and assist in relation to the housing crisis and addressing the issue of homelessness and the huge and terrible figures associated with that, he said it's not necessarily his remit and it's not his job or his role. And he was quickly reminded that it wouldn't have been set up were there not a housing crisis. So my point is, many councils, unfortunately, throughout the country, don't necessarily have the capacity or the sort of professionalism and commitment to the provision of houses that they had previously. And it was with that in mind that this agency could have had a greater role, insofar as it could have provided a vehicle for whether it be public or private finance to engage private developers to build houses on state lands and rent them to local authorities for 100 years if necessary. And I'm particularly conscious of credit unions and the role that they can play there. I was talking to a credit union in my own county this week, with 285 million at their disposal. They have 65 million out in loans, so they can adequately cater for that. They were laying off 50 million this week, and they're getting 0% return. 0% return. And they don't have the capacity under present legislation or central bank rules to participate in a scheme such as this. And they are more than willing to do so, and more than willing to get a return on it, which would be far greater than 0. If it was only 1% or 2%, it would be 200% better than what they're getting presently. And that's, I hear you saying, what difference exists between us and you in relation to policies, or what recommendations are we making? That's a recommendation I've made some time ago, and I was given to believe that we were moving in that direction. Yet here we are nearly 2 years later, and I don't see any progress in that area. So I'd just like you to respond to that also. In relation to broadband, and I'm nervous that this could end up like the Children's Hospital too. Did you think, for the moment, there's 22 million spent to date, and not an inch of fibre optic cable in the ground yet. You said, in response to a question in the Dáil yesterday, that you're afraid the cost might be many multiples of what was initially envisaged. And the National Development Plan provides, I think, for 275 million this year. If it's many multiples of that, when will we know how many multiples it is? Will a decision be taken to share that information with us before the contract is signed or after the contract is signed? And if it materialises to be many multiples, apart from the ability of the contract to deliver or the quality of it, what then happens with the commitments in relation to the National Development Plan? We've already seen We've yet to get much of the detail associated with the 100 million that's to come off this year's spend in relation to capital development in the National Development Plan, let alone the spring statement as to tell us what's the story next year, because there's 100 million plus for the next 4 years to come off it, as against the commitments that have been made since the launch of 2040 itself. So if this then is many multiples of that, where do we stand, or when will we get rectification, or when will we be put on notice as to what the consequences of that overspend is going to be in relation to the National Development Plan? In relation to insurance, and again I'm talking broadly here because and I accept and acknowledge the detail that you have contained within here and to spend within your own department, but as you said in your initial statement, your primary role is to support of your department is to support you in your function as Taoiseach, which in turn supports the government and oversees the implementation of the programme for government. In relation to insurance, is it true to say that the delay and the procrastination in relation to the Judicial Appointments Bill is withholding or blocking the efforts of the Department of Justice to bring forward a Judicial Council which might help and assist in relation to the whole area of insurance, which is a damning indictment on business, unfortunately, and its ability to do business in many parts of the country presently? Is that the case? And I would have thought they'd be well able to multitask and that legislation could be brought before the House parallel to the other issue. Finally, you answered some questions in relation to Project Eagle, that and the costs associated with it. And I take the point that you make, and it's well made, but yet there's an interest and an expectation on the part of the public further to the recommendation of the DOL to ensure that information in relation to it could get back for adjudication and people's involvement in it and whatnot. That was to be ready last June, am I right? Now we're told it'll be reporting this June.
Sorry, that's...
The Commission of Investigation in relation to Project Eagle. Will it be forthcoming? Can you commit that it will? And again, do you have any indication at this stage as to the lessons that might be learned from that and any cost implications that would have on your ability to be able to implement the programme for government as initially envisaged?
Thanks, Deputy Taoiseach.
Thanks again, Deputy. You asked me about my interview this morning on News Talk, and I was asked if I found any aspect of the National Children's Hospital controversy scandalous, and I said I did, and what I found to be scandalous was that some of our agents employed by government, albeit indirectly through the National Paediatric Hospital Development Board, underestimated the costs so majorly, and they did, and the cost of the hospital, I wasn't terribly surprised that it might turn out to cost more than we thought, but I was really shocked that it was 450 million more than we thought, and that was down to a number of factors, ranging from VAT to construction inflation, which nobody could have controlled, but the underestimate of some of the costs could have been foreseen and should have been foreseen earlier, and that's the element that I said I found scandalous. Obviously, as head of government, I take responsibility for that. I can't come in here and claim credit for the public finances being in balance or full employment or all of the aspects of the capital programme that are happening on time and on budget, whether it's Lewis Cross City or the Gortune motorway or the schools programme or pretty much everything else for the past 10 years. I can't go around claiming credit for all that and then wash my hands of this, so I take responsibility for it as head of government. The fact that people who we employed and we trusted to get their numbers right got them so enormously wrong, and that explains a significant chunk of the unanticipated higher cost of the Children's Hospital project. What are you doing about it? First of all, there is the PwC analysis is being carried out now to see what can be learned from it, and also to see if there are ways that we can pare back the cost. I'm sceptical about whether that's going to be possible, but I think we have to leave no stone unturned in seeing if there's ways that we can pare back the cost of the project, provided it doesn't in any way result in any kind of downgrading or diminution or de-speccing of the project. We had that before with hospitals, new hospitals built 20 or 30 years ago, and corners were cut and phases were removed, and we spent 30 years adding all that back on at much greater expense. So I would only be in favour of cost cutting if it didn't diminish the value of the project in terms of healthcare and paediatric care. It is now very much underway. It's something that's been promised for as long as I can remember. First talked about in the 60s, first called for by doctors in 1993. It is now well under construction. The first aspect of it, the satellite centre in Blanchardstown, will open to children this year, Tala next year, and then the main campus in St James's in 2023. So this at long last is being done, albeit at 50% more than we anticipated it would cost. I think there's definitely lessons in terms of public procurement into the future, and we've made no final decisions on this, but among the areas that we're examining, for example, is factoring in a risk premium around big projects when we're projecting the cost of a project. There's always a degree of what they call optimism bias or promoter bias. The people or the agency promoting the project will often believe it's going to come in cheaper than it really does, and that applies from all weather pitches to major projects. So we need to factor in some risk premiums around that. The other thing we're considering is whether we should pay a bit more attention to the median price of the bids. There has been some criticism from some quarters that in the public sector we tend to go for the lowest price bid, or tend to weight very heavily who comes in with the cheapest price, and perhaps that's not the right approach. Maybe we should look at the median price and then give a score to those who are below the median price, and I've talked about that in the future. The third is one that I really strongly believe in, and I'm determined to make this happen, and that is in and around what I call a past form or a public sector reference clause. It's not possible for us under EU procurement law to ban a contractor from tendering for a job, even if they haven't done a very good job in the past. And I'm not talking about any particular contractor. There are numerous examples, quite frankly, of companies that have done a bad job in providing public buildings or doing other work for government. And I would like to see written into public procurement a sort of reference, just like if you were going for a job in any office in this city or any business around the country, you'd come with a reference based on what your previous employers think about how you did. And I'd like to work something that into public procurement so that those companies, contractors, professional services companies, whoever they are, that we would be able to take and weight more heavily their previous form in doing work for government. So they're the kind of things and the kind of reforms that I think we should make into the future. On the NESC, they've done 3 reports related to housing. There is the Urban Development, Land Housing and Infrastructure Fixing Ireland's Broken System report that was published back in May. Also the International Approaches to Land Use, Housing and Urban Development, and the Land Value Capture and Urban Public Transport reports. And they're all very good and worth the reading. They did help to inform the decision to establish the LDA, the Land Development Agency, which I guess I see as sort of an ESB for housing. I see it as a semi-state. I see it as government getting involved more in the business of development and construction, building houses and building communities. A lot of that's done through local authorities already. It's done through affordable housing bodies, but I think this is additional to that, and that's what we need is additionality. We need councils building more, we need affordable housing bodies building more, or approved housing bodies building more, but we also need the LDA, particularly when it comes to high density, high rise sites in more urban areas. And what they will do is build housing of all sorts, social housing for people who are on the housing list, cost rental housing, which is a model that we haven't used much of in Ireland, but I think it has merit, and that's going to start in places like Emmett Road. Affordable housing scheme houses, particularly in urban areas where there's a real affordability issue, and houses for purchase. But they are only getting started. At the moment, it's just a board established by statutory instrument and a small number of executive staff, so it's going to take them a bit of time to ramp up. But we'd anticipate them being on site in 2020, building houses in 2020, and that's what I want to see happen. What, sorry?
Credit unions role.
Yeah, like that's something I need to study a bit more closely. I know it's not a new idea; it's been around for quite some time, and I know your party's put it forward that credit unions should be able to lend for housing construction. And I'm not entirely sure that actually is a government decision at the end of the day. It may be a matter for the central bank to decide whether or not they can do that. I could be totally wrong, so maybe it's something I need to explore a bit better. But there's one thing we'd always have to bear in mind when it comes to enabling credit unions to get involved in development finance, and that is the potential risk to savings. You know, the credit union model is all about small savings and small loans, and when credit unions start to do things that banks do.
In the absence of credit unions having options for investment, if I give you that credit union alone as an example, they're only lending 20% of their capacity. They have $1 million coming in a week that they can't use. But the laws in relation to the central bank are such that they must invest in the pillar bank. The pillar bank is giving them no return. They want to play a part in a role and have a role in helping and assisting in their own communities. And here's the primary way in which they can do it that benefits us all and benefits many of our constituents. And it's an area that has to be investigated, and that Land Development Agency does offer a vehicle by which that construct can be put in place that can allow pension funds in this country as well, and can allow private investment if necessary. But it has the same return, and the return is providing units, providing homes, providing vitality in our communities that unfortunately many councils, despite the best will in the world and the intentions of various departments, including your own, can't deliver. And they can't deliver because I was in a council since 1992, and I know, and it's no reflection on their willingness to do it, but the professionalism and the capacity and the expertise that was there 40, 50 years ago in this area, it ain't there anymore. And the department, together with them, they're supposedly doing their best for the last 7 or 8 years. We have to think outside the box. They're not able to do it as far as I can figure out.
Well, I think that's correct. I think a lot of local authorities have lost practice and have lost the corporate knowledge when it comes to building housing, and what LDA can become is a house building semi-state that builds houses in the way ESB builds electricity infrastructure, the way Bord Gáis or Gas Networks Ireland does it for gas and so on. On the credit union issue, I don't want to pretend to be an expert on it, and I know it's been a topic of discussion before. The things that do occur to me, though, is that local authorities and indeed government and LDA can borrow from the European Investment Bank at an extremely low interest rate. So we wouldn't want to end up borrowing more expensively if we can already get loans from the EIB at a very low interest rate. And then secondly, we would just need to bear in mind the safety of people's small savings in credit unions. I imagine the reason why they're only allowed to invest in certain areas is because they're low risk. We all know that development finance and investing in the property sector is potentially high risk, and you then therefore need to have large capital ratios to insulate yourself from when things go wrong. But maybe you're absolutely right, but we just need to bear in mind those factors, that we need to protect people's small savings in the credit unions, and we need to make sure that any interest rate that government would pay to borrow for development would not be a high one. It would make no sense to borrow for 3% off the credit unions when you can borrow for 1% or less from the European Investment Bank. That would be a huge loss to
I'd be happy if it were such that you've taken on board what I've said, you've acknowledged the potential that's there, and you're willing to look at it again with a view to maybe arriving at a decision that's more akin to our way of thinking. That's all.
No, I am deputy, and I will, and I don't think I've all the answers. So yeah, I'll do that. It's a reasonable suggestion.
The broadband, just on the broadband.
On the broadband, as I've indicated in the Dáil on a number of occasions, we don't yet have a preferred bidder. We've one bidder left, yet to be designated as a preferred bidder, and we've yet to make a decision as to whether we go ahead with the national broadband programme. But the cost is going to be multiples of what had been projected many years ago. Going ahead with it wouldn't have a significant impact or any impact at all on this year, but it would have an impact on future years. We'll have to bear that in mind in making a decision. Very different to the Children's Hospital. This is a 30-year project, so the cost is spread over 30 years, and it involves private finance and involves user fees, so it's a very different financial model. But it would have an impact on on the capital envelope in 2020 and beyond, and we'll have to take that into account.
The 2019 envelope was 275, is that right?
I can't remember the exact figure, but the impact, any impact on 2019 would be between 0 and 11 million.
Pearse Doherty.
That'd be minimal.
Pick up on that point in terms of the National Broadband Plan. You can't say, is it correct in saying, Taoiseach, that you can't say at this point in time whether the National Broadband Plan will proceed?
I can't say that until the contracts are signed, so that would be the case for any project.
No. I think, well, look, that's a fair enough answer, but I don't think it's a real answer. The question is there a question now in relation to whether the National Broadband Plan will proceed, given the escalating costs of this project?
It's government policy that it should proceed. This is something we want to do. We've got to the point where, from where 3 years ago, only about 50% of premises in the country had access to high-speed broadband, where it's up around 80% now. And that's mainly private sector driven, but very much a government role involved in that too. But that still leaves about 500,000 homes and farms and businesses who don't have access to high-speed broadband. And I want them to have access to it, because when I think about what Ireland's going to look like in 10 or 20 years' time, I think of a country in which people work for multinationals, but they do so at home. You know, that's already happening with Apple, for example. 25% of their staff work from home. There's no reason why.
I'm just trying to get it for the person back home in, say, rural Donegal, or the business there that's working in Uthers na Gaelta, the enterprise park, that doesn't have access to broadband and is at the cutting edge of IT but doesn't have basic broadband. Is there certainty for them that the National Broadband Plan is going to proceed?
There's no certainty on any project until the contract is signed.
Okay.
The
cost-benefit analysis that was originally done, obviously the original cost of this project was estimated at 500 million. It's been reported now that it could be in the region of €3 billion, 6 times as much. Is the cost-benefit analysis being updated as a result of new costs?
Yeah. The cost-benefit analysis is being updated, obviously recognising that the benefit is the same, but the cost is.
And does that allow for the project still to proceed on the basis of the cost-benefit analysis?
Ultimately, the decision on whether it proceeds will be a decision that is made democratically by politicians. That there are projects that have proceeded in the past with a negative cost-benefit analysis.
Okay.
You know, it cost. You know
yes,
how BCRs work.
A negative cost-benefit analysis.
I'm not saying it's negative, by the way, but it's not as simple as there are lots of projects for which there's a very high benefit to cost ratio and they didn't happen. There are other projects that had a low benefit to cost ratio, like the Western Rail corridor and the motorway between Carlow and Waterford, and yet they went ahead. So it's not simple. It's not just a mathematical decision as to whether the BCR is more than 1.5 or less than 0.8 or whatever. It's also a political decision fundamentally. It's whether this is something we want to do.
And what knowledge do you, as Taoiseach, have in relation to the cost at this point in time?
I have knowledge based on the last briefing that I got on it from the department.
So are you in receipt of the information of the likely cost of this project to the Irish taxpayer? Not
a definitive one, but the likely range, yes.
Okay. And when you talk about that there needs to be a process of consultation, when do you expect to share that with indeed the public who will be footing the bill for this, the other political parties in here who, given the length of this project, may be in government at a time when these funds have to be found and sourced?
Yeah, my target date for making a decision on this would be to make a decision on it before Easter. I am conscious of the fact that there's great uncertainty over the next couple of weeks as to what's going to happen with Brexit. We may find ourselves in late March or early April coming to the Oireachtas seeking a very substantial supplementary estimate to bail out our beef industry, to keep people in employment across rural Ireland, in particular in the agri-food sector, to support our exporters. You know, so I have to bear that in mind. So if I'm coming to the Oireachtas looking for you and the Oireachtas to vote the government more money, you're going to want to know what other bills are coming. So,
Yeah,
I'd like to know that. I don't know that yet.
Is it your intention, because you put on the record yesterday about a conversation with opposition, so is it your intention for government to make a decision and then have a conversation in relation to, well, we've now approved this and this is how much it's going to cost and let's all see what we can do? Or is it a case of, look, we've got this. In my view, there's a mess made of this. We have one bidder. We're over a barrel in relation to this bidder. There's a piece of infrastructure that the rural communities have been crying out for. This process was supposed to be ended in 2017. I'm not even sure if the process can still go ahead, because that was one of the reports that was to be commissioned in relation to the integrity of the process. Maybe you can shed some light in relation to that. But what is your intention in terms of engagement with others, or is this solely going to be a cabinet decision in terms of to proceed or not?
The report in terms of the integrity of the process was favourable, so I don't have concerns about the integrity of the process. There's also benefit and cost analysis being done. There's an external review involving international experts, and then one of the big consultancy firms, I think it's either KPMG or PwC, has done some work on it too. My intention will be to consult with the opposition parties before signing any contracts, precisely because this is a 30-year commitment that will extend beyond the life of the stall and the life of this government.
Is this also scandalous in the same way that you described the costs overrun or underestimation in relation to the National Children's Hospital?
I don't believe so, but we're still in process on this, so I don't have a clear sight of everything yet. But I will.
Well, you've more of a sight than we have, so I'm just trying to figure out what we can know, being in the dark. We know that it's multiples of 500 million, so it's way and above an overrun on what was the National Children's Hospital. We're not talking about hundreds of millions, we're potentially talking billions here. But it's not scandalous that the government got this so wrong in terms of their estimates of this project?
Well, no, because this is a totally different project and is totally different in its scale and substance. First of all, when this was originally mooted, a large area was going to be part of the National Broadband Programme, probably the bit that was profitable, which would have cross-subsidised the rest of it. And because of EU state aid rules, factors beyond our control, the private sector went in there and was able to provide and is providing broadband to those areas where it's profitable to do so, and that has left the most unprofitable area for the government to pick up the tab for. So that was something that changed during the course of this. There's obviously also changes in technology as things go on, and there's also the fact that you never really know. And this is true for any project. You can never know for sure what's going to cost until the tenders and the bids come in. And the tenders and the bids, or at least the one bid, has come in for this. This is totally different to the National Children's Hospital, where well into construction on a phase 2 basis, these escalating costs emerge. That won't happen here because we actually know what the cost is going to be before we start. Okay. It's quite different on a number of grounds. There's also private finance being invested in this, and there's also user charges. So people try to say it's the same as Children's Hospital. Actually, it's nothing like it.
No, it's actually not, because it's a lot more bloody money. That's the overrun. The reality is, like, you're talking about billions of euro additional. Like, what we're hearing from the media is that the range is between 1.5 to 3 billion euro.
There's no overrun, Deputy, because there's no
underestimation,
no money spent and nothing worked. No work actually done. What happens when you have a major project, whether it's a road or whether it's a metro, whether it's a runway, whether it's a bundle of schools or a new hospital, is you put it out to tender. And when you get the tenders in, you can then decide whether you're willing to go ahead with that project or not based on the cost. That is how big projects work. What was different about the Children's Hospital, well, there are a number of differences, but one of the differences was this two-stage process where we didn't know the full cost.
Taoiseach, before you put anything out to tender, there is an assessment made in relation to the range of a potential cost. Yeah. There was a cost-benefit analysis already done in this project at the early stage based on a cost of 500 million euro. This could end up in the region of 3 billion euro. Like, this is a spectacular underestimation or an overrun on a planned project of national importance. And it really, really questions how government are handling major capital infrastructure projects. The fact that you believe that this isn't scandalous, or that lessons can be learnt from the fact that we have now one bidder, only one bidder? What if we don't agree with the bidder's price? What's plan B?
Well, you always have to ask when you look at plan Bs or Cs or Ds is whether they be cheaper or whether they be quicker, and that's part of the examination that we've been doing. Because, of course, if there's a plan B or a plan C or a plan D that's quicker and cheaper, you do it. But if there isn't, maybe you wouldn't. But these are decisions that have to be made. But just to be very clear and very straightforward on this, there's no overrun here. This project hasn't even started. A tender has come in at a certain price, and it's our decision now, as a government and as Oireachtas, as to whether we want to pay that price, whether we believe it's worth it or not. There's no overrun here.
But look, we have a capital envelope going out to 2021. 275 million has been allocated for this from the state's point of view. There has been an estimation that has been calculated into our budgetary arithmetic, which was based on a 500 million. Whatever way you want to play with the words, there is a spectacular overrun on this project. If this project ever sees the light of day, there has been a spectacular underestimation on this project. And if the government continue to underestimate capital projects in the way that they are doing the National Broadband Plan or indeed the National Children Plan, this country will be soon calling for the IMF again. Like this has never happened in the worst days on the scale of a underestimation of a capital project. It's never happened on Fianna Fáil at that level.
I don't think, in fairness, Deputy, the IMF will be called in because of anything this government has done. It's this government that got rid of the IMF and saw them out of here. The
point I'm making is if you continue to run over by €2 billion on capital projects, 2 billion here, £500 million there, then you need to acknowledge that there's problems in terms of how you've dealt with the tendering process, that we're now down to one individual, that we're over a barrel, as you said. There is no other quicker solution. So this is why they have us over the barrel, because now, being delayed so long, we have a situation where we either decide to go and do it all again, and there's questions about how that will be reached because of decisions that have been taking place to allow for the most lucrative part, the 300,000 premises, to be carved out of the system.
That was never a decision. That's how state aid works. That was never a government decision to allow that, so that's just incorrect, Deputy.
Quickly, I'll go on to some other points. Can I just ask you briefly, do you believe that the Moriarty Tribunal was value for money?
I haven't studied it from a value for money basis, quite frankly.
Okay. Well, the reason I say is you raise questions in relation to tribunals and commissions of inquiry. And
I think it did very good work and made some very relevant findings, many of which have caused us to change the law and inform policy. Whether it's value for money or not, ask the question, could it have done the same work less expensively? Quite possibly.
Do you have any concerns in relation to your government relying on the support of one of the key characters, the star of the Moriarty Tribunal, and indeed your engagement on different occasions with Mr O'Brien, who was also one of the stars of the Moriarty Tribunal?
I'm not sure the Deputy wants to elaborate on that, but I'm not quite sure what he's alleging.
Well, first of all, your government is supported by Mr Lowry. I think the tribunal was very clear that there was payments made from Mr O'Brien to Mr Lowry in the region close to about £1 million sterling. There's 3 different transactions. I think this is well documented. I'm sure you've read the Moriarty Tribunal. I'm talking about your engagement with Mr O'Brien as you're meeting with him, for example. Well, no, that's fair enough. I'm just asking, in terms of value for money and in terms of the integrity of the tribunals, do you have any concerns, particularly in relation to your government?
I'm afraid, Chairman, this is just mudslinging. I bumped into Dennis O'Brien in a corridor in Davos over a year ago, and you know what the Deputy is making out, it's pretty ridiculous, quite frankly.
No, I'm just asking you a question, and if you want to correct it.
We're going to miss
the
importance of the estimate.
Well, in terms of Mr Lowry?
What's your question, sorry?
In terms of the fact that a tribunal, which unearthed a lot of information, which I believe was value for money in my own view, and that your government relies on the support of Mr Lowry, who was democratically elected to this House, but was also one of the key findings made against him in terms of the tribunal.
That estimate, Deputy Doherty, relates to the numbers in the House. It doesn't relate to the numbers in his office.
That's fine.
Does it concern you that you have in your party, on your benches, people who have very serious criminal convictions?
I am asking the questions in relation to yourself.
the estimates,
Who do you want to name?
I don't believe there's
Taoiseach,
anyone supporting my
Doherty, please move
government
on.
who has serious criminal convictions. Does it bother you that people?
Mr. Lowry actually has a criminal conviction.
Doherty, please.
The question, and let me just clarify this here. I'm just making the point in relation to commissions of investigation and tribunals that there have been a huge benefit to the state in the past. And particularly some of the previous ones in relation to that, and that there is value for money in it, and I think that we need to learn the lessons from it. In relation to the IBRC investigation, can I ask you? You asked for an intermediate report. Has there been any correspondence back from the judge in relation to that, given that the extension is only the end of March 2019?
Sorry, is that Cook or Cregan?
That's the IBRC. That's you asked for an interim report back in the 19th of December. There's an extension, and we've been engaged in this as members of the opposition. There's an extension to the end of March. Has there been any correspondence back in relation to that interim report? And is it your intention to extend again if you don't get the correspondence between the interim report between now and the end of March?
Yeah, I've received correspondence from the judge in that case.
And will we get the interim report before the?
That I don't know, but I have requested it.
Okay. In relation to Project Eagle, the NAMA investigation, are you satisfied that June 2019 will be the deadline and we won't need to extend? Or have you any indication? Sorry.
Yeah, the indication I have is that they've requested a further extension with the view to reporting until the end of June 2019, and I've granted that extension. I've no reason to believe that there will be a further request for an extension, but it is an independent commission investigation, and I'm not across it.
Okay. Can I ask you in relation to the Attorney General's office, in terms of the estimates, there's a large, quite impressive number of legal advices that it's provided upon requests and members' bills and so on and so forth. In your view, is the Attorney General's office sufficiently resourced to deal with the demands that currently exist, given, the configuration in here in terms of a minority government and more opposition bills and needing to give advice in relation to those? Is your view that there is sufficient resources within the Attorney General's office to meet the demands of the House of the Oireachtas and the demands that the government places on that office?
I think the Office of the Parliamentary Counsel could certainly benefit from additional resources. It's not just a simple matter, though, of allocating an estimate. Finding people who are available and have the skills in drafting legislation isn't as easy as we might hope. But I definitely think the OPC could benefit from additional resources for sure.
Okay, and finally in this here, and thanks and promptly, you mentioned in your speech about reducing the unemployment rate, and we recognise the unemployment rate is falling, and you go to talk about zero employment, and what's not in your script, you say a job for everybody who wants one. What is, in your view, zero employment? What rate is it?
Zero.
Full employment. What is full employment? What rate would that be?
I think economists put it at around 3%, recognising that there will always be a certain number of people who are between jobs. If you look at the figures at the moment, long-term unemployment, that's people who are out of work for more than 9 months, is I think about 2.7%. So based on that figure, we have full employment at the moment. There will always be people who are in between jobs for one reason or another, receiving job seekers benefit.
Okay.
They may be made redundant, they might be looking for a job, it might take them 6 months.
I appreciate that. I just want to know a figure. There was some discussion in terms of that the figure should be a wee bit higher, but I'm not going to push you in relation to that. The reason I raised this, because I've heard Minister Doherty make the same point. Unemployment's falling, which is an excellent thing that's happening, and there's a job for everybody who wants one. That really annoys people in regions where the unemployment level isn't coming down in the same rate. I come from Donegal. If you look at the Central Statistics Office, which give the best, when everybody's sampled, you would have had a higher rate of about 5% higher than the national average in terms of unemployment. So when people say even when we do reach the level of full employment, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a job for everybody who wants one. And I'm just asking you to be cautious in relation to that, because it also stigmatises or tries to label those in areas in more isolated communities where the economic recovery has not reached into, and that there is no job prospects for them in those regions. So I think it's important in relation to language.
I think, in fairness, Deputy, I said our objective was to get to the point where there's a job for everyone who wants one, not that there is a job for everyone who wants one. I acknowledge that there are certain parts of the country whereby the number of people who are job seekers exceeds the number of vacancies. But you take the country as a whole, we're now at the point where there are almost as many vacancies as there are people looking for work. And that is close to full employment.
Deputy Deasy.
Yeah, Taoiseach, I just have one quick question. It's something that we discussed last night. You may remember Pat Deering brought it up. In your opening statement, well, I'll get to you in a second, okay? In your opening statement, you talked about Project Ireland and the commitment the government has made to the development of technological universities, with a particular urgency being attached to the technological university in the southeast. I think everybody would agree that it does need urgency at this point. The last, I think, official answer came a couple of weeks ago, and the Minister on the floor of the Dáil chamber said that the application had not been received as of yet. In September, I can remember somebody saying it was expected within weeks. The current president in Waterford recently said it's progressing, but not quickly as it should be, which is the understatement of the century, considering how long this has been going on. I think the outstanding issues, I think the TUI wants a memorandum of understanding to be completed before the application is submitted. There's still an issue with regard to Kilkenny potentially becoming the headquarters of, all kinds of discussions and negotiations still continuing with regard to HQ, etc. From your own perspective, can you give us an idea as to what you think the timeline might be at this point, and where people can expect, or whether or not people can expect progress when it comes to the university that's mooted?
I suppose when we look at the whole project around having a technology university for the South East, it really fits in with three things that I want government to get done for Waterford City, and that's the second cath lab in the hospital, it's the technology university, and it's the development of the North Quays, which is all part of developing that city as the major growth centre for the South East. Technology universities, I think, can be of a huge benefit to a region. It means more students staying in the region, or at least having the option of staying in the region. It means more students coming into the region. It means more jobs, more investment, and more employment being spun off for the region. Attending the inauguration of the Technological University for Dublin was kind of bittersweet in a way, because it was great that we had our first technology university. It's great that it has a campus in my constituency in Blanchardstown, but it's another university for Dublin when there isn't one at all in the South East, and that's why I'm so determined to get this one done. It does seem to me, though, that the major issues and the major hold-ups are differences and disagreements between the different institutions that will make up that technology university. Dublin's already happened. Munster is ahead. It's likely that the Munster one will come in ahead of the South East, which shouldn't have been the case. South East should have been the first one, in my view, to get over the line. But the problem does seem to be, and I'm not 100% across this, but obviously I talked to Minister McHugh and Minister Mitchell O'Connor, but the problems do seem to relate to some industrial relations questions and then disagreements between the different sites and the different campuses. But this year, I would anticipate the application in this year.
Okay.
I'd be very disappointed if it wasn't the case.
Okay. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Well, Taoiseach, just to pick up on where Deputy Deasy was discussing with you about the university, is there a way that you can indicate to the parties concerned that you're anxious that this would be brought to a head quickly? Because in neighbouring county to Deputy Deasy, we realise how important it is for the South East. And it's wrong if it's to go ahead. It's wrong that it should be, that the participants in it should be dragging their heels, as it were, by not getting in the application. And the second question in relation to the South East, so you mentioned the Catalan, the cardiac care. It's 24/7 care that's being argued for. And I think that you do need to look at that in the context of the second lab. And it is an issue, and thousands of people have marched in the streets, and it is worthwhile, I think, to pursue that. My question on the inquiries is this. We spend 74 million, and we're probably going to double that in terms of the outturn. That could be possible. So, with the Attorney General and the other legal advisors that you would have in your department, have you studied other ways of having these inquiries? And I appreciate the point you make that, in the Dáil we ask for all sorts of inquiries. And some of these inquiries may be needed. They are needed. They can't be open-ended. And I think that your department, if it were to undertake some work on devising new ways of different tiered inquiries of one kind or another, would assist in dealing with some of the matters. For example, the inquiry which the Dáil approved of in relation to the death of Shane O'Farrell. The inquiry there would want to be, we asked for a public inquiry. Now it's being kicked off into some other arrangement, much to the annoyance and dissatisfaction of the family. They're very disappointed. But for that, there should be, a new inquiry that maybe would be tight in its time frame, would be cost effective in terms of its outturn and so on, rather than going down the same old route all the time. Has any work been done on that, or do you think it's worthwhile carrying out some work on it to be more effective and more efficient in terms of cost?
Yeah, I suppose just to answer on the Technology University of South East first. I've been to Waterford Institute of Technology as Taoiseach, and I've been to Carlow Institute of Technology as Taoiseach, and I've met the senior management teams there, and encouraged, cajoled and impressed on them my desire to get this done and the government's commitment to the project. And one of my special advisors has a particular remit to sit on this one and try to get it delivered over the line, working of course with Minister Mitchell O'Connor and Minister McEwen. I'm determined that we get it done. About those appearing that Munster will have their application in before the South East, which is great for them, but very disappointing for the South East, I think. On the whole issues of inquiries, I suppose the whole idea of the Commission of Inquiry Act was to do exactly that. You'll remember we'd a lot of tribunals running at one stage at very considerable cost and running for a very long time. Some of them having done very good work, I accept that, necessary inquiries that did good work, but took a long time and cost a lot of money. And there was a view that the commissions of inquiry would work better. I think to a large extent they have, but they're also imperfect, and there's been a lot of delays in a lot of them. Like obviously the ideal inquiry that everybody wants is one that's quick, in public, and doesn't cost a lot. I'm not sure that's achievable in the real world, because anything that involves findings of fact, anything that involves potential enormous damage to people's reputations, means that people have a right to be represented, have a right to legal representation, have a right to recourse to the courts. So, the utopian perfect inquiry is one that is in public, inexpensive, and doesn't take years. I'm not sure that's always achievable.
But have you examined?
I'm not sure anyone's ever
Is there an
achieved that.
ongoing examination, because you're
Not at the
spending
moment.
so much money on tribunals? Is there an ongoing examination as to what might work better than what we have right now? That's my question.
Yeah, not at present, but that had been done in advance of the Commission of Inquiries Act. Now that we've had a critical mass of commissions actually happen, maybe it's time you should do that.
I think you should, because of the cost involved. And you have the example of Charlton, I think, who, that particular inquiry was very efficient. I think that we can learn from it, and I just would encourage you on the basis of value for money and what is costing the taxpayer to carry out that for that analysis.
So a lot of it can be down to the chairman as well, in terms of how efficiently they operate, and also the issue as well that, like, inquiring into commercial transactions is never going to be straightforward, or inquiring into events that happened decades ago.
Can you answer me why, when the Dáil voted by a big margin to have an inquiry into the death of Shannon Farren, that the government ignored it?
I wouldn't accept that we ignored it, Deputy. The Minister for Justice took the motion into account and has established a process, has appointed somebody to examine the different aspects and different claims, and potentially scope out what an inquiry would look like and what it would do.
We've had 7.5 years of GSOC on that one.
Excuse me?
We've had 7.5 years of GSOC on that one. Is that not enough of a scoping inquiry? Is that not enough information to give you an idea of what is required? And I'm talking about respect for the Dáil vote.
Well, no, because all GSOC can do is inquire into Garda matters, and the particular claims and allegations in this case extend well beyond the Gardaí.
And respect for the Dáil vote? I just want to get your perspective on it, that's all.
Yeah, no, I think if you're going to set up an inquiry, you need to do it sparingly, and you need to do it in a way that it's going to be successful in terms of finding answers and making findings. And it makes sense. Like, for the vast majority of inquiries, to my recollection, it wasn't just set up. A barrister or a judge or someone with legal expertise scoped it out in advance. And that's a sensible approach to me. Yeah, I think.
Okay, well, I won't pursue. You mentioned in your opening statement the growing economy and it being shared by all, and the equality of opportunity. And both of those statements, when compared with the housing issue, the homelessness issue, and the issue of the activities of vulture funds in this country, the statements are fine, but in terms of actions, I would say that those that are caught up in issues with vulture funds and so on, they've been put through the ringer. And I would love to see the government acknowledging that in some way, shape or form, and trying to improve their lot in particular, because dealing with banks, dealing with these funds, while we would say that there is protection there with existing regulation or legislation, there really isn't in practice. And I'm just wondering, have you any analysis of the effect of these funds up to now on society, on families, on community, rather than just a financial aspect of it?
I think that there was a very good analysis done by the Central Bank, which was analysis of the Code of Conduct for Mortgage Arrears, and how it differs from banks to what they describe in that report as unregulated loan owners. And that's actually a very informative report, and tells a more nuanced picture than what often comes across in the media in relation to how vulture funds deal with debts and deal with resolving them. We've also accepted legislation from the opposition to extend regulation to vulture funds, and we've legislation going through at the moment, championed by Minister Moran, requiring the courts to take many more factors into account before issuing repossession orders. So that's the work that is being done to extend consumer protections to people who are in arrears, to have a code of conduct for mortgage arrears, to extend regulation to the vulture funds, and to require the courts to take even more into account before they issue repossession orders. So that's quite a big body of work, and we know Ireland, relative to other countries, has a very low rate of repossession. But we also need to always be aware of the bigger picture when it comes to these things. And I know it's a difficult thing to say, but we do live in a country where we have hundreds of thousands of people who are paying a mortgage, who are paying interest rates at higher rates than other European countries. Some of that is down to inadequate competition in the banking sector. But if we have a situation whereby increasing numbers of people don't pay back their loans, don't surrender the security when they don't, the effect of that is going to be higher interest rates for hundreds of thousands of people who are paying their mortgage, and making it much harder for tens of thousands of people who want to get their first mortgage to get credit. And we have to take into account the wider societal impact, to use your term, of anything we do in this space.
Yeah, I disagree with you in terms of the approach, and I just want to avail of the opportunity to say to you directly in this formal setting that the vulture funds are extremely difficult to deal with. They're becoming even more difficult. The banks are now as aggressive and as arrogant as they were during the time of the crash and afterwards. And people who want to pay, these are the people that I'm talking about, and want to engage with the banks, in spite of what the banks would say about the engagement, the banks are not engaging. And that's been the experience of the hearings that we have had here at this committee. Time and time again, you know, the tracker mortgage is another example. And I'm taking the opportunity to highlight these. I know you're aware of them. There's a different point of view, fine. But I think that we do need to take into account the commentary from the individuals concerned, the many thousands of people that are caught in bad mortgages, and their cry for help, and the fact that they continue to tell us that it's an issue of non-engagement from the side of the banks. That's the point that I'm making. In terms of the CNAG, just the legislation that was going to control under general legislation that was being suggested by our own party, and again, I just want to encourage you to look at it. We've had an overrun in Children's Hospital. We have issues, we'll call them, around the broadband. You know, it's not an overrun. It's, as you say, it's at an early stage yet. There's an overrun on the works on this house here. That was flagged for us by the Department of Finance. And really it's time to update that legislation, the CNAG's legislation, to give a greater role in the context of the examination of the spend of public monies, running right down through the various organisations. And I think that if you were to do that, it would be a piece of reform that would have a very positive impact on the activities of government officials and so on, and it would certainly raise the flag of value for money in this House. And I'm just drawing it to your attention.
Yeah, I think that's an idea that has merit, Chairman, and it's one of the reasons why we decided at Cabinet not to oppose it, was that we think it has some merit. The traditional role of the CNAG, as you know, is to examine expenditure that's already occurred rather than planned expenditure. But it might be a useful additional role if the office is able to take on that role, because at least we would then have a body that could look at issues such as the extra cost of the Children's Hospital and come back to us and be able to say, well, we have looked at this and yes, it was unavoidable. So I think maybe it's just an idea that's worth exploring.
I want to flag for you. One is affordable childcare in community, delivered through family resource centres in the main, and they're dealing with Hubble. And an issue is now emerging across counties. A new group has been formed on the basis that there isn't enough flexibility within the oversight of Hubble to allow for the various social disadvantages that occur in communities like this. And they're experiencing huge financial difficulty in meeting the Hubble requirements in terms of bureaucracy and red tape, and it's something that will come to the fore in the next few weeks. I've raised it with the Minister concerned, and I would just ask again that you would, I'm asking that it would be flagged, because, as I say, it's going to be an issue and it's going to affect those that are most marginalised in our society and can't afford to pay. It's just flexibility we're talking about. So that will come up. But the matter of Dáil reform, just to ask your opinion again on Dáil reform and on this style of new politics, because of the fact that you have your department looks at Dáil reform. How do you think that the Dáil has worked. Do you think that this particular Dáil has given value for money?
I think it has, but being a member of it, I'm kind of biased. So when you're a member of an institution, you're always going to think it's value for money. Perhaps,
I'm a member,
perhaps the wider public may think otherwise.
No, I'm a member. I don't think so. I think that there's a lot of functions that go on in this house.
I think there's good things and there's bad things. I think the fact that there's much more private members legislation being accepted is a real positive.
And being part.
Yeah, but more private members legislation has become law in this Dáil in the 3 years it's existed than probably the 15 years of the last 3 Dáils. So that's definitely a positive and some important legislation too. I think we do have a problem around duplication of committees. Committees kind of warring with each other as to who's going to take on which issue and calling in people twice. I think that is a problem.
I just work within my remit deputy Deasy. So
You did, yeah.
when you renewed the confidence and supply arrangement, was there any new stipulations put into that? Any new actions required?
No. What happened there, and I'm happy to put this on record, is I put forward a proposal last summer that the constant supply agreement be renewed, that we agree that the next election be held in the summer of 2020, and I put forward a set of policy ideas that I believed could be implemented between now and then. The Leader of the Opposition took a different approach, which was to seek a review of the constant supply agreement. Which occurred, and a lot of work was done on that for a number of weeks. And I had thought at that point we would then start talking about the content of the next agreement, if you like. But the decision of the Leader of the Opposition was not to go down that route, and rather to...
And will you be publishing papers on the review?
Do what?
You didn't discuss opinion polls then?
To?
Did you? Sorry,
The confidence and supply. You seemed to say at the weekend that we were predetermined by virtue of our standing in the polls.
That's not quite what I said.
Taoiseach,
More nuance than that, Barry.
So will you be publishing any of the papers around the review? Will your officials who were in the detailed meetings dealing with all of these issues, would those papers be published?
Don't intend to. Their party.
I didn't ask you, Deputy Count.
I didn't answer you.
I can nearly predetermine your answer.
We don't intend to. Their inter-party discussions.
Well, they're not government to opposition. They're inter-party.
That's correct.
Okay. And job security then for the members in the House. How do you feel about 2019?
No idea.
But surely, like, job security is very important for all of us.
Certainly is.
So
Certainly is, Chairman. But nobody goes into politics looking for job security.
All right. Okay. Well, that's a fair answer. That's all I have to ask you. You won't give us the date of the election. 2020 is okay for you?
I don't necessarily think I'll be the one making that decision.
Oh. But surely you're the Taoiseach. You wouldn't make
the focus, Chairman, is on the job. It's on getting the job done, on getting the country through Brexit, getting a withdrawal agreement done, and focusing on all the other issues that the public are concerned about.
Okay.
That is the focus.
Thank you very much for your attendance, Taoiseach, your time and your officials. We'll suspend the meeting while we're changing over officials. Welcome the Minister of State. Maybe you'll give us your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Central Statistics Office is responsible for the collection, processing and publication of official statistics on economic, social and general conditions in Ireland. Alongside satisfying the statistical requirements of government, the information published by the CSO is also used by an extensive variety of public bodies, businesses, third-level colleges, research institutes and the general public. There is a significant international dimension to the work of the CSO. The EU institutions, the IMF, OECD and other international bodies are all important users of official statistics. These bodies also have a significant role in defining and monitoring standards for the compilation of comparable information. And the CSO subscribes to the standards set out in the UN Fundamental Principles of Official Statistics and the European Statistics Code of Practice. The CSO net allocation in 2018 amounted to 48.746 million. The net allocation for 29 million for 2019 is 54.714 million. The funding provided reflects the Government's commitment to allow the Office to actively respond to significantly increased user demand for the development of new outputs. It also supports the development of the Irish statistical system in line with obligations under national and EU law and consistent with Government's strategy for the development of trusted and robust official statistics. As part of the preparing for the census of population in 2021, the Office will have to source a census processing system in 2019 and progress the development of a digital census enumerator record book that will replace paper recording and tracking. Technology system support is increasingly required at every stage of the production of the CSO's progressively more complex and varied outputs. The funding will allow for the upgrade of legacy Office systems and improve digitisation of data analytics that are aligned to both the public service ICT strategy and government data strategy. The CSO will commence scoping the development of a significant new national survey on the prevalence of sexual violence in Ireland. The Growing Up in Ireland, or GUI survey, is the national longitudinal study of children and youth. The GUI study was started in 2006 and the CSO has been requested to take over responsibility for GUI from 2023. Planning for this will commence in 2019. In all, during 2019, the CSO will publish about 300 releases and publications. All of these statistics are published online. Members of the public are increasingly aware of and able to access statistics and indicators on the social, economic and environmental issues which affect their daily lives, and the online channel is the Office's primary publication method. The CSO's Statement of Strategy 2019 gives priority to delivering the core statistics needed for policy while keeping a strong focus on cost management. The Office continues to meet all its commitments under the Public Service Reform Programme and is implementing a programme of reform and continuous business process improvement in the collection and processing of statistics. The CSO is leading the development of the Irish Statistical System, or ISS, works closely with other departments and the wider public sector involved in the collection, processing and dissemination of official statistics in order to promote a more coherent approach to meeting data needs. It has developed a code of practice for the Irish statistical system. It is also strongly promoting the development of the national data infrastructure, which will provide for better coordination and greater exploitation of the varied data sources available across the Irish public sector. It would also lead to greater understanding of the importance of data in supporting policy and decision making and delivering efficiencies in public service provision. Making better use of data throughout the public sector is an important part of public service reform and will contribute to more evidence-informed decision-making and better measurement of policy outcomes. Better coordination and greater use of administrative data also contributes to reducing the burden on data providers. Since 2008, the CSO has continued to reduce the response burden of its non-agricultural business surveys as measured through the response burden barometer. A decrease of 41.3% was measured between 2008 and 2017, exceeding the target reduction of 25% over this timeframe. The CSO vote for 2019 provides for a total of 825 staff. This represents an increase from 801 in 2018 and reflects the cyclical nature of the work of the Office. In conclusion, I would like to commend the values and principles which inform the CSO's work. The CSO makes an important contribution to Ireland's public policy by providing a high quality and, most importantly, an independent statistical service.
Thank you very much, Minister. Could I just ask you a question in relation to the gathering or the collection of data and information to do with the insurance industry? We were doing some work on the cost of insurance, and the CSO provided us with some information on insurance, but it doesn't cover cost of insurance to business, so we're not getting a complete analysis. Is there a reason for that, or is that a piece of work that could be undertaken?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in January 2018, the Cost of Insurance Working Group recommended that the CSO commence a study on measuring price information, the cost of insurance to business. The background was that the working group recommendation was the absence of quality information on business insurance, including official statistical data to inform policy formulation by government. The CSO have provided a report on this work to the Cost of the Insurance Working Group, and the report will shortly be published by the CSO. One of the findings of this study was the lack of international precedent for a price index for business insurance. and the difficulty in measuring price changes in this area, and the report assesses several potential data collection methods and outlines the specific approach CSO will pursue further. The CSO will continue its research into business insurance in 2019 before deciding whether to begin collecting and compiling a price index on this topic. I mean, if the working group have other recommendations, they can be assessed by the CSO within their resources and to see if there is the possibility of providing data.
It's just that, and I'll finish on this, it's just that in the course of our work, we have collected a lot of information from representative groups, bodies around the country that complain to us about the cost of insurance, be it motor insurance or public liability. And I think that because of the fact that the information in general about insurance is held by Insurance Ireland, it would be, I think, a very important piece of work that could be undertaken from an independent body like the CSO for the government or for the working in the works of this committee. So I would encourage you just to look at it. It's just a point.
Yeah, I'll certainly take that on board. I mean,
the CSO is respected for.
Absolutely, they're very much respected as an independent body, and certainly I will liaise with them to see if that's something that they might be able to take on board.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy Burton, did you want to ask?
Thank you very much, and again I want to welcome the Minister to the committee. My query just concerns one issue. You'll be familiar with the Savvy report in relation to sexual violence in Ireland. There was an announcement some time ago that this survey was to be re-undertaken. It was last done in it was last published in 2002. It's a very extensive survey of several thousand people into sexual violence against men, women and children in Ireland, and it is considered, I think, by most people involved in issues relating to violence to be an absolutely key-line survey. I'm just very disappointed to see that, notwithstanding the fact that the CSO is taking it over, the lead on it the last time was Professor Hannah McGee from the College of Surgeons, and she and her very large team carried out a very extensive survey, which is very well regarded in terms of people who work in the field and absolutely essential by people like rape crisis centres and other people who provide services to people who have been the subject of sexual violence. As I'm sure you're aware, Minister, this issue of sexual violence, whether it's children, and we had a discussion yesterday with Minister Sapone talking about issues arising in Scouting Ireland, or whether it is other issues relating to sexual violence. I think everybody who works in Leinster House is aware of the issue. But the last time the survey was done, it took 3 years plus preparation before it was finally published in 2002. It has remained the only such survey until now. And yet I see a reference here is that the CSO, which is taking it over, which on balance is a good thing. I'm in favour of the CSO taking it over. That they're simply going to commence a scoping exercise. Now, issues in relation to sexual violence in Ireland are really serious fundamental issues for our society, and I'm really disappointed that a scoping exercise is going to be commenced. Now, given that the survey itself, as with all CSO surveys take a very, very long time. Typically things like silk take a minimum of a year and a half. A lot of the changes take very long periods of time to establish. So I'm just really, really disappointed. Could you tell us when you expect the survey proper to commence, and how long you expect it to take, and how long you expect the scoping exercise, as it's described, to last for before we then get into the actual survey. I think it's incredibly disappointing for all the organisations who work with victims of violence. It's also, of course, an important survey in terms of assisting the work of the Garda Síochána as well.
Thanks, Chairman. I'd like to thank Deputy Burton for a very important question of what is a significantly challenging undertaking. And you rightly said the CSO has been charged with undertaking this very important work, which will involve the CSO scoping a means of collecting sensitive personal data in a manner which is confidential, ethical and designed to support accurate and reliable survey results. In doing so, protecting the privacy and supporting the needs of all involved has to be the priority. The challenge of SAVI is a departure for the CSO. In order for the data to be robust, there will need to be very explicit questions regarding behaviours associated with sexual violence, which will have to be asked of respondents. It will require specialist expertise and training, consultation with key stakeholders, consideration of best practice from international statistical organisations regarding appropriate collection methods. Given the complexity and sensitivity of the survey, it is envisaged that the entire process of scoping, planning, executing and reporting on the survey may take in the region of 5 years. Exact timelines will only emerge as the scoping progresses. And if, obviously, we would all hope that that time could be reduced, but if 5 years is required due to the complexity of the issue, well, then that will be required. But if it can be reduced, it certainly will. Exact timelines, as I said, will only emerge as the scoping progresses. The provision of reliable, robust, objective and internationally comparable information requires that the planning and execution of the survey is undertaken in a professional and comprehensive manner. So there's an amount of preparatory work done to be done in relation to what form and shape the survey will take, and then a degree of training of people who will have to be doing interviews on very sensitive information where confidentiality is an absolute must. And I mean, nobody is going to take part in a survey unless they can be absolutely assured that confidentiality of their data is protected. So we would all love that this would be completed quicker, but we are saying that it may take in the region of 5 years.
Well, can I just say briefly, that's terribly disappointing. It means it'll be well over 20 years before the next survey will be published. Can I just ask you as well, has the CSO at this point even contacted people like Professor McGee here in the College of Surgeons who did the first survey? And you know, I mean, just given the groundbreaking work she and her team did, all of the factors that you're talking about were taken into consideration then. I mean, I just find it extraordinary that you're talking about 5 years. I mean, and then I see underneath that that in fact you're also taking on the Growing Up in Ireland in the CSO. So is that another 5-year hiatus as well?
Thanks, Chairman. The 5 years has started from this year, from the 1st of January. Initial engagement has taken place in relation to this. I cannot confirm at this stage if Professor has been engaged, but we can get back to you in writing on that particular issue. The Growing Up in Ireland survey again is a survey that has been done previously by the ESRI, and the CSO, because of their expertise and reputation, have been tasked with taking this over from 2023. So that's still some time off. But There has been extensive discussions in 2018 with the Department of Youth Affairs and Children and the ESRI. So the transfer of the study will offer a number of advantages to the GUI, most notably the transfer of the project will more firmly embed it in the official statistics for Ireland and thereby providing a more certain future for the study, which I think we all agree is a very important and common sense survey in relation to young people. So it will be part of the continuous programme of the CSO into the future.
And what's the timeline for that one?
Well, we've been requested to take over responsibility for the GUI from 2023. So, I mean, there will be some. So, I mean, there will be. The survey won't be interrupted, if you like, before that. So the CSO will officially take over in 2023, but the other groups will continue their work in the meantime.
Thank you, Minister. We've now fully completed our consideration of the revised estimates 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, and the Clerk will send a message to that effect to the Clerk of the Dáil in accordance with Standing Order 90. Under Standing Order 89.2, the message is deemed to be the report of the committee. I want to thank the Minister and your officials for attending, and the Select Committee is now adjourned until 10 a.m. on 7th of March. Thank you.